Hi, LA Progressive friends and family. We're back again with one of our favorite authors and speakers, Mark Fancher, who's a lawyer and writer, joins us fairly often. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing just fine, thank you.
So I just wanted to thank you, Mark, for this piece that you've written and submitted to the LA Progressive. The title is "The U.S. is Not Yet Ready for Revolution." I think that every progressive activist, every person who calls himself a liberal activist, should read this piece. It is so important. And Dick and I were at an event yesterday, and I was thinking about your piece while we were at this convening of people who were trying to provide support to an organization that is trying to widen or cast a broader net and get more people involved in electoral politics, get more people registered to vote, registered Democratic, but not even touching on any of this really important stuff that you address here. So, um,
First question. We're coming off an Indian man born in the heart of Africa, elected mayor of New York City. We had 7 million people out in the streets protesting no kings. How dare you say we're not ready for a revolution?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think those things are wonderful. I think that they are real indicators of the progressive movement of people's thinking on a mass level. They're breaking down a lot of taboos and barriers. I mean, how dare anybody even think about voting for someone who's a self-declared socialist? How dare this many people come out into the streets? So this is all good, but I think the point that I'm trying to make in the piece is that it occurs against a historical backdrop and against a cultural backdrop that don't take us where we would want to be if we were seriously thinking about trying to prosecute a revolution. Uh, I think that historically, people in this country have been the targets of a propaganda campaign, psychological operations on some level, that has been very, very effective in causing them to believe that the problems that we confront in this country are not structural, that they're not institutional, that we have the perfect government, that we are the model for democracy. Everyone around the world should try to emulate what we have in terms of how we do government and how we conduct public life, that we are the model. And when things go wrong, that it's not because of any defects in the system or systems that we operate under. It's because we've got the wrong people in office. And so I think that if that's where you are in terms of your thinking, the last thing that you want to do is to engage in revolutionary struggle, because why would you want to overturn or eliminate something that's so wonderful? Somebody's messing things up. And what has to be done is that that individual or those individuals just have to be removed from office so that we can put somebody in who's going to do it the right way. And it's really a matter of self-delusion on a mass scale. So many people think that way. And when that's the circumstance, then it's really not likely that these are people who are going to really look at the problems which are really contributing to the predicament of so many suffering people in this country. And they're also not going to be willing to identify their true enemies, which are people who understand what we've been talking about very clearly and who have a vested interest in maintaining the delusion.
absolutely, Mark. I just couldn't agree with you more on this article. You talk about the stark contradictions of fascism and oligarchy, and I was brought back to an article I read more than 10 years ago about a study and a report issued by Princeton University, Martin Gylens or Gillens and Benjamin Page, were the social scientists that conducted a decades-long research project where they found that the average person who voted regularly, was civically responsible, but the average person that did that had a snowball's chance in hell of getting the kind of policy and legislation that they thought they were supporting. Because according to this report, deep-pocketed corporations and deep-pocketed individuals are pretty much getting what they want, and the average person is not. And I thought when that study came out, because it was so well researched, it was put out by Princeton University. There were thousands and decades long information gathered. I thought that perhaps, me and my naive self, I thought perhaps there would be some kind of awakening, some kind of change. I'm sure you're aware of the study.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunately those things are not people don't lock into those things. They don't really study them or analyze them because they don't feel that there's a need to. They this country really has been persuaded that we exist within a democracy, and the scam, the game that's been played by the oligarchy, by the major corporations and others, is based on their understanding of the need that people have to participate in a democratic process. They really have to have that. And the oligarchy does not want them to have that. So what they have to do is they have to create the illusion of a democracy. So they give you two major political parties so that you have a choice. If they could get away with giving you one, then they would, but they've got to give you at least two so that you feel like you have a choice. And they control both of them with respect to things that are of importance to them. They're concerned about the money. And so they make sure that both parties, when it comes to the economy, are right where they are with respect to that. You know, the capitalist system is not subject to question or challenge at any time in any place. They are both on the same page with respect to quote unquote foreign policy, which for them just means their unfettered ability to go around the world and to engage in empire building and intervention. They're on the same page when it comes to the military and the defense budget and all of those kinds of things, because in order for them to build empire, they have to force their will from time to time. When they can't bamboozle people or they can't use covert operations or other things. So those are the things that matter the most to them. And if you look at the Democratic and the Republican parties, they're right there. There's not a dime's worth of difference between the two. Now, in order to distinguish the parties, they just pretty much yield with respect to social issues. The corporations and the oligarchy, they don't care about that stuff. They don't care about how people engage in or feel about birth, about marriage, about sex, about gender identity, and all of these. They don't care about that stuff. And so if you've got one party that takes a position that's different from the other party on those issues, then that helps the illusion. That helps people to think that there's a difference between the parties and that they can vote for one or the other based on their social views. And as long as you're fighting over social views and social issues, the major corporations and the oligarchy, they're just as happy as they can be because they don't care about any of that stuff. They just want the ability to maintain power and increase their profits. So, as long as people have bought into the idea that it's really important to me to get my views enforced with respect to social issues, and so I'm going to vote for the Democratic Party. As long as they feel that that's what's important to them, without looking at these other things, then they're quite happy too.
Right. And not only are they happy, but they will soon be disappointed again because it is ignoring these other issues that have led us to the place where we are right now. Trump didn't come out of a vacuum. Trump came out of a culture that prepared and increasingly got to where we are now so that we could have 70 million people say, oh, it's okay to have a president who grabs women's genitals. That's fine. That's fine with me. I like to have that person represent me on the national stage.
Yeah, because he's gonna he may be bad personally on those things, but with respect to our right-wing evangelical agenda, as to issues like that, then he's going to make sure that there's no abortion, that transgender people don't have any rights, that we end this culture, that we prevail in this culture war. He's a bad guy personally, but he's got the right agenda, and so that's all that we really care about.
So one thread you have is that we can't have a revolution very well because there's no we. The body, the group that would be most likely at the center of any kind of revolution would be the white working class. But rather than direct their animus and hatred toward the capitalist overlords, they direct it toward immigrants, black people, brown people, dividing us. And this is, as Sharon has written before, and you well know, this is not by accident. This is a plan that's fomented. So is there any way we can overcome that?
I don't think so, at least not through any type of external education or pressure that we might exert. I really think that that group, I think some of them are so deep into a cult type phenomenon that they're lost.
Right.
And I think that there are others who will only be persuaded when they persuade themselves. And then I think what is most unfortunate is that to some extent, notions of white supremacy are so deeply embedded that it's almost an incurable condition for some people. They can't help themselves, even if they consciously decide that they no longer want to harbor those kinds of views. They can't really purge them, and I think that that's true even of people who are very progressive. Implicit bias is a real thing, and sometimes it's more insidious when it really manifests in terms of white supremacy. And it's the end product of a long, centuries long effort to reinforce these kinds of basic notions. And you don't just get rid of something like that very quickly. Initially, white supremacy was born as a justification and a rationale for territorial conquest and for slavery and for other things. I mean, people have more positive instincts. They are more inclined to want to be good people and do good things. And the only way that you can persuade them to do bad things is if you persuade them that that the bad things are good.
That's right.
And for that reason, when they were enslaving people, they had to convince people that this was for their own good, that these are people who are barbaric, they're cannibals, they're savage, they're heathens, and that we as decent white people need to civilize them. They benefit from being enslaved because they are coming into close association with those of us who know a better way. When you look at territorial conquest, you see that they not only had to rely upon white supremacy as a concept to justify taking the lands of all of these people who were of darker skin, but they even had to resort to law and religion in order to do it. So the justification for territorial conquest was by way, many times, of papal bulls or edicts that were issued by the Vatican, which proclaimed that by rights given to these explorers by God, they were to engage in these civilizing missions in these heathen territories and to bring religion to those who were savages. So it has a very long history, and in this country in particular, it has been very carefully and cynically used in order to divide white workers from people of color. because if you look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 talks about Black people being three-fifths of a human being. This was a cynical manipulation of a constitutional provision in order to ensure that the very few white people in the South who were slave owners would get what they regarded as fair representation in congressional apportionment. And
Right.
so, since there were fewer white people in the South than in the more congested North, they said you can count your enslaved people as three-fifths of a human being for purposes of apportionment. They don't get to vote, but in terms of your congressional representation, you get that. And so they recognized even from the outset that they had to, control a population, that they had to preserve their elite status as a group by dominating the rest of the people, many of them white, who were very poor. And they had to develop among the masses of white people a perception that they were favored, that their allegiance should be to this group of elite white people, this little, the forerunners of today's oligarchy.
Right.
And white people signed on to that. White workers who really had more in common with enslaved black people than they did with these privileged white people. They signed on to it because they knew that, at least according to what they were being told, that this is a white man's country, and it would always benefit white people, and that they had prospects for upward mobility that the natives didn't have, that enslaved Africans didn't have, and so they guarded that jealously.
That's
So
right.
it's from the beginning. They've been schooled to think that this is a country by and for white people. They're the ones that are supposed to be privileged. And whenever things don't go right for white workers, then it's got to be the fault of these people who really don't belong here.
Yeah. So I'm right there with you when you're talking about the cognitive dissonance of average human beings. People want to be good, to do right. And when they are uncomfortable with what they see as injustice, cruelty, unfairness, they've got to find a way to explain why this is happening. And so that has been the legacy of slavery in the United States. I was just reminded of the word, as you were speaking of the word drapetomania, which was a term that was coined by a doctor back during slavery times that explained why on earth a slave would want to run away. It had to be some kind of mental illness that would cause them to want to run away, because certainly being enslaved is much better for a Black person, not for white people, of course, but much better for Black people being enslaved than having their own freedom and making their own decisions. And that definition is still floating out there. It's in Wikipedia, and it should be. We should know the depths to depravity, the foundations for these things. But I'm unlike you, Mark. I do believe that there is hope. And one of the reasons I believe there's hope is because I know so many white people who didn't know a lot about this stuff, but when they really learned their history, they began to change. And so I think that we have an opportunity, especially now, as they see that this trick of having white supremacy and somehow being buffered from the terrible treatment that people of color receive, they're starting to see, oh no, it's only a matter of time. And it's actually already happening, especially to poor whites. It's been to their detriment that they believe they had protection, but they are beginning to see that no, they don't have protection. We cannot live in an oligarchy. So I
Yeah,
do have hope.
yeah. I'm not totally pessimistic about everybody. I think that that's why I titled it "Not Yet Ready." I
Yeah,
think that at some point, it may happen, but I don't know that everybody is going to come along for the ride. Because I think even, what we're talking about in terms of people wanting to do the right thing, it's really hard for people to admit to themselves sometimes that they were wrong. And so people dig in sometimes, even those who are presented with the most clear evidence of the fact that what they do, what they say, what they think is really wrong. It may be even evil. They can't live with the idea that that's who they are or who they've been, and they sink even deeper into their state of denial. But I do think that there the future may be a very good one in terms of the rising level of consciousness. And I think the evidence of that is, we take some, we have to look at victories where we get them. And I think that the election of Mandani is reflecting something that's very significant. And, I know certainly when I was a young person, certainly in my teens, my 20s, my 30s, I was a socialist back then, but it was something that I had to whisper, because it was such a dirty word. I mean, it really would label you as being some sort of a really weird freak that you would actually think that something like that is correct. But now we see that a younger generation has its level of consciousness has risen. They understand the logic of it, the virtues of it, and the value of it, and they have no problems at all electing someone, voting for someone who is a self-proclaimed democratic socialist. And even now, when I speak to young people and I mention it, whereas at one time people would react, now most kids just kind of shrug their shoulders. It's as though who isn't a socialist?
Yeah.
So I think that this reflects a human tendency of people continuing to evolve toward more decent standards, more having aspirations to become better. And so it can happen. It's just that there are certain obstacles to us getting all the way to where we want to be, which are very, very high.
They are.
So along this issue of racial divide, Sharon and I helped organize a Left Coast Forum a couple of weeks ago, along with Tavis Smiley and his crew. And we had long wanted the LA Progressive to reach out to Black and Brown audiences. And at this event, at least half of the people were Black. And Sharon organized a panel session there called Racism on the Left. And she was apprehensive because she thought, well, white people, you're calling me a racist?
Especially leftists and
Right.
and progressives and
Progressives,
liberals.
right. But in fact, it was like a wonderful conversation. And I'm with you that I think there's a segment of the society, segment of white society, that was lost and will stay lost. And then there's a small group that's pretty woke, if we can still use that among white people. And then there's the leftist group, and they're not racist exactly in the sense that they want to actively work against Black people. They're kind of just oblivious to the issue. But that's the target.
That's
that
the target.
They can be unoblivious. They
That's right.
can be educated to the importance that we're not going to make progress on Medicare for all and socialism and revolution of any type until whites and Blacks and browns and Asians can pull together and stop recognizing the racial differences and start recognizing the economic and social similarities.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And here's where it becomes the challenge, I think, and that is that in terms of how people, it's some of it's cultural, in terms of how people have been socialized in this country, uh, and so much of the manifestation of our socialization is involuntary and
Mhm.
unconscious.
Mhm.
So that it's just sort of a matter of course that when a person is white, that their viewpoint is the viewpoint that should be accepted. That it is the correct viewpoint.
It's the
That,
normal.
yeah, that somehow the white person, is certainly able to engage with and entertain the viewpoints of people of color, but ultimately it's only going to be a valid conclusion reached by this group considering a thing once the white person signs on to it and validates it.
That's right.
And so and that's not always done consciously.
Hmm.
It's just something that people have been trained to do. And so when you have people who are progressive or on the left, and they may have very noble objectives in terms of trying to bring about justice and, social change and economic parity and economic justice and all of those kinds of things, all of this in their heads is being processed through a very white perspective. What is it, what kind of an outcome can we have here, which is going to be one which is consistent with my worldview and with what I think would be the right outcome here. And I won't name the organization, but once I was approached by a self-styled revolutionary organization member who explained to me how they'd worked out this plan for the revolution and how it was going to unfold. And so I said, well, where are Black and Native people in all of this? And they said, oh, we have a plan for them. And totally innocent in terms
Yeah,
of
innocent. Yes, yes, yes,
but this was just as a matter of course. And and
yes.
and I think so many of us who are people of color see it play out in our daily lives on
Daily.
an individual level. I
That's
mean,
right.
there have been so many occasions when I've worked with teams of lawyers, and I've done this deliberately, where I'll float an idea for strategy, and so people will just kind of, look at it or whatever.
Yeah.
And I will have arranged with a white colleague to
To
suggest
do the
the
same
exact
thing.
same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Oh yeah, I've done that too.
And once he does, then oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, that kind of thing is tough. I mean, how do you get people to address those kinds of issues?
I don't know,
But
maybe,
it's real.
maybe talking about it, maybe, telling people as often as we can that this is what happens. I've witnessed it myself. And I remember a time where there was a young administrative assistant, Black, at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'm going to call out the organization, who came to me, and I was the financial manager for a spaceflight project. And she was a administrative assistant to a scientist. And he'd asked her to compose a short letter to one of another scientist asking for something. Didn't matter. But she had a whole database of letters that he had composed, that he had forgotten that he had composed. So she took one of his letters and then gave it back to him. He was the writer of the letter. And he marked it up with red pen and showed all the ways that she wasn't grammatically correct and so on. She was just a terrible letter writer. So she never told him that it was one of his own letters that he had written like a year ago. And she came to me and she asked me, "Well, how should I handle this?" She was a young woman in her 20s. And I said, "You got to pick your battles because you're in for a lot of that. And they never know that they're doing it." So maybe we should talk about it more. I don't know.
Yeah, and and I think ultimately it's going to depend upon the extent to which people really honestly want to become better people.
Yeah.
And I conclude the piece by discussing, that very basic consideration. Right now there are so many streams of emotion and sentiment in our society that are very negative. We are living in the era of Trump, but I think that while not everybody is a MAGA person, to some extent, they can't help sometimes but be dragged into a state of mind which is somewhat hateful, mean-spirited, antagonistic, just the opposite of being kind and considerate. And I think that if we're serious about transforming a society, then that's basic. We have to, as individuals, be at least have those qualities. We have to love each other first.
So on that point, I think I'm always the guy with the glass half full. I think a lot of people a lot of people who are sympathetic to some of the things we've talked about are highly alarmed with what's going on in the country. And this is an opportunity because they realize things have to change. And they could be persuaded that, well, we got to lock arms across the races and together to effect that change. I mean, I think that's a message that we saw in your panel session. The white people were eating it up. I mean,
Oh, it was
they
great.
understood.
It was a magical moment. I was surprised, and I was quite apprehensive before the plenary began because it was a multiracial, multi-ethnic group. It was standing room only. There were quite a few people who couldn't find a seat that were standing up against the wall, and we wanted to open it up to the audience to be in conversation with us. And it was powerful. It was civil. It was really great. So I think that there is an appetite for change,
Right.
But we've just got to try to structure that or provide people what they need to learn more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that also there has to be an appreciation that this isn't free, that there's going to be a cost to it.
Yeah.
And the question is always, are people prepared to pay the cost?
Yeah.
And, if the idea that people have is that, okay, I'm willing to be nice to these people. I'm willing to be kind to them. I'm willing to help them and work with them and do all of those kinds of things. But I don't know if I'm prepared to go as far as to say that we need to give the country back to the native populations. Isn't that going a little bit too far?
Well, it's worth having the conversation, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that's the only way that we get to a point where people are actually prepared to understand that that's not a preposterous idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think that it's dismissed out of hand because,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness, if we were to do that, then that turns upside down the society that we've been building over more than 200 years, and we've been, it just turns everything upside down. And what it demonstrates when they react that way is that they've given not one thought to the fact that native populations, which had been here for thousands of years, were forced many times to completely uproot their entire nations and walk across the country and live in the most barren areas out west. The Cherokee, walked the Trail of Tears, left everything behind, at a moment's notice.
Right.
And why is it okay to do that to that population and to say that it's preposterous in order to do what's just and right by them for the rest of us to have to face similar consequences just as a cost of being just and right.
Right. And it's not preposterous that at some point in the very near future, there's a strong possibility that Elon Musk will become a trillionaire. That's not that's not preposterous.
Yeah.
That's a reality that we apparently are willing to accept.
Well,
Absolutely.
Mark, this is a fabulous article and a fabulous conversation. I love it when I see your articles in my email stack, and we look forward to the next time we can get together.
And we want to ask everyone who can hear this, everyone who has read Mark's article, please share it. That's all I can say. Just share. Thanks, Mark.
Well, thank you very much always for the platform and for all of the very hard work that you do that is so beneficial to so many.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.